What if I told you there's a new commander from Edge of Eternities that combines two of the most powerful mechanics in Magic, Landfall and Group Slug. His name might sound like a meme, but he is one of the strongest Gruul Landfall commanders we've seen in years. For just 3 mana you get a 2/4 creature with a really simple ability. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, Tannuk deals 1 damage to each opponent. And if it's the second time that ability triggers in a turn, you also get to draw a card. And that's it. That's the entire text box. Unlike most Landfall commanders, Tannuk doesn't care about going wide and swarming the board with tokens or ramping out some really huge creatures. Instead, he turns every land into a source of damage. And once you're triggering Landfall twice in a turn, he becomes a really consistent source of card draw as well. The result is a really strong Gruul Landfall deck that plays nothing like what most players would expect. And that's honestly what makes Tannuk so interesting. It's a Landfall deck at heart, but it plays like a Group Slug deck. You just play lands and you slowly bleed out the entire table. You play a land, you deal damage, and you draw a card. Over and over again, until someone looks up at their life total and they realize they're already at 10 life. And the beauty of it all is, you barely need any setup to make this happen. Every ramp spell, every fetch land, every land you play from your graveyard, Tannuk turns all of those into value. This is not a combo deck by any means, you're just playing fair Magic. You're just ramping, dropping lands, and gradually you will overwhelm the table by pure efficiency. And the longer the game goes on, the more dangerous this deck actually gets. We run multiple ways to get additional land drops each turn, a ton of cards that allow us to play lands from our graveyard, and a ton of damage effects that increase the damage that Tannuk does or also deal damage to the entire table at once. And for me personally, covering another Landfall deck on this channel feels really nostalgic. If you've been following me for a while, you know my all-time favorite deck is the Necrobloom, arguably still the strongest Landfall commander ever printed. And it's also the very first deck tag I ever made on this channel. The Necrobloom is the card that started my entire YouTube journey, and it is the reason that you are able to watch this video right now. So coming back to Landfall with a twist like this feels like a full circle moment for me. With that emotional blabber all out of the way, let's get into the deck. As per usual, I will be going over every single card I decided to include in the deck and explaining why I decided to include it. This video is divided up in 7 categories: the Landfall enablers and recursion, the win conditions and damage engines, the ramp and acceleration, support and card advantage, protection and interaction, the lands, and a considering section. Let's get started with the Landfall enablers and the recursion cards we run in this deck. These cards are the absolute backbone of the deck. They let us play multiple lands per turn, they allow us to replay lands from the graveyard, or just allow us to drop a pile of lands onto the battlefield at once and get like a million Tannuk triggers. Elvish Reclaimer, a 1-drop 1/2 elf. Passively, this creature will get +2/+2 if we have 3 or more land cards in our graveyard. 90% of the time you will meet this requirement, and Elvish Reclaimer will be a 1-drop 3/4 creature. Pretty solid value. But that's not the reason why we play it. The real reason is his activated ability. For 2 mana, tapping him and sacrificing a land, we get to search our library for any land card and put it onto the battlefield tapped, functioning as a land tutor on a stick. There's a million cool tricks you can do with Elvish Reclaimer, so let me just give you some examples. First up, and probably the most obvious, when you have Tannuk on the field, you can just play a land, get a Tannuk trigger, then use Elvish Reclaimer to sacrifice that land, get any second land, and you will get a second Tannuk trigger, allowing you to draw a card. Another trick you can do with Elvish Reclaimer and Tannuk is use Fetchlands during an opponent's turn to draw a card during their turn. Since the second part of Tannuk's ability states each turn you can actually drop 2 lands in an opponent's turn, and you will also be able to draw a card. During an opponent's turn, you can just tap Elvish Reclaimer, sacrifice one of your lands, go get a fetch land, then sacrifice that fetch land, play any other land, and you will also get to draw a card of Tannuk. And obviously you can also use Elvish Reclaimer to get one of the utility lands we play in the deck at any given time. Be it a Field of the Dead to generate a zombie army, Talon Gates of Madara to phase one of your creatures out and protect them on instant speed, or even a Kessig Wolf Run if you do need a way to close out the game. Honestly, the fact that you have to sacrifice a land to use this ability is more of an upside in this deck than it is a downside. Since in this deck we do play a ton of cards that allow us to play lands from our graveyard. And this also feeds really well into Elvish Reclaimer's passive ability, making it into a 3/4 creature. Exploration, a simple 1 mana enchantment that allows us to play an additional land on each of our turns. As you will see later in this video, in this deck we do play a ton of cards that have this effect, allowing us to play additional lands. That being said, Exploration is the most efficient one of these cards because usually this effect is attached to a 3 mana creature. Cards that allow you to play additional lands are absolutely crazy in this deck, especially if you can find a way to play lands from your graveyard. And also worth mentioning, if you can get an Exploration out as soon as turn 1, you will have a really good start. Trust me. Aftermath Analyst, a 2 mana 1/3 creature with probably one of the strongest landfall abilities ever printed. Whenever this creature enters the battlefield, we have to mill 3 cards. Since we play a ton of land recursion in this deck, this is actually a benefit for us. And it also synergizes really well with its activated ability. For 4 mana and sacrificing this creature, we get to return all lands in our graveyard to the battlefield tapped. This is basically Splendid Reclamation attached to a creature body. In this deck, we will be sacrificing a ton of Fetchlands, we will be milling ourselves, and over the course of the game, we will be sacrificing a lot of lands. So we will always have a ton of lands in our graveyard. If you can then for 4 mana return all of those lands to the battlefield, you will generate some insane value, especially if you then have Tannuk on the field. If you, for example, return 7 lands, the entire table will take 7 damage. And we play a ton more cards in this deck that have some awesome triggers whenever a land enters the battlefield. A nice little trick you can do with this card and Tannuk is that you can activate its ability during an opponent's turn, and then you will get an additional draw of Tannuk. Loot, Exuberant Explorer. It's a 3 mana 1/4 creature we got in the Foundation set, and it has the passive ability that we can play an additional land on each one of our turns. Like I mentioned earlier, there are a ton of 3-drop creatures that have the passive ability that allow you to drop an additional land. Loot is one of them. On top of that, Loot also has an activated ability. For 6 mana and tapping him, we get to look at the top 6 cards of our library. Then we can reveal a creature card from amongst those cards with mana value less than the amount of lands we control. Usually in this deck by turn 5 you will have somewhere between 7 to 9 lands, so basically you can cheat any creature in this deck into play with loot. Be it a Lumra, an Omnat, an Avenger of Zendikar, you name it, you will always have enough lands to cast these creatures for free. You can basically just view loot as a 3-drop creature with an exploration attached to it that also has a really cool ability that you can use later in the game to get some creatures cheated into play straight from your deck. Zeldincht, a 3 mana 0/3 creature we recently got in the Final Fantasy set. Another 3-drop that allows us to play an additional land on each one of our turns. And passively, this creature will also get +1/0 for each land we control. So usually this will be somewhere like a 5/3, a 7/3 body at all times, which honestly isn't that bad for just 3 mana. At the beginning of our end step, we have to return a land we control from the battlefield to our hand. Once again, in this deck, this is actually a benefit. Since the main problem you'll be having in this deck is not getting the lands on the battlefield, but just having enough lands in your hand to actually keep playing and keep getting Tannuk triggers off. This card just allows you every single turn to just get a land card back to your hand, and next turn you can play it again to get some Tannuk triggers. Case of the Locked Hothouse, another card that allows us to play an additional land every turn. This time it's not attached to a 3 mana creature but to a 4 mana enchantment, Case. The Case enchantments are all cards that have some sort of a requirement that it will check at the end of your turn. Whenever at the end of your turn you have this on the battlefield and you control 7 or more lands, this case gets solved, meaning you get to unlock the second passive ability on the card. We get to look at the top card of our library at any given time, and we are allowed to play lands, creatures and enchantment spells from the top of our library. This might seem really underwhelming for a 4 mana enchantment, but what this essentially does is give you an immense amount of card advantage. Essentially, you will be playing with 1 additional card in your hand, being the top card of your library. If you have a couple of effects that allow you to play additional lands stacked on the battlefield, and you do have some lands on top, you can just play a land from the top, play a land from the top, play a land from the top, and you will be able to dig really deep into your library. Hux, Grizzly Guardian. Since this card got spoiled, it has been living in my head rent-free. I have been wanting to use this card in a deck for a really long time, and this deck is just the perfect home for it. The mana cost is 4 mana plus X. Doesn't matter what you pay for the X, this creature will always be a 5/5 trample body. And he also has the passive effect that allows us to play an additional land on each one of our turns. Whenever Hux enters the battlefield, you get to exile the top X cards of your library, and you are allowed to cast those until the end of your next turn. You can basically view this card as a huge body that will allow you to drop additional lands and generate you a ton of card advantage. For example, if you want to cast this for 9 mana, you tap out and you will get to exile the 5 top cards of your library. If, for example, in the exiled cards you hit some lands, you are instantly able to play one of them thanks to Hux's ability. Then you pass the turn, and by the time it's your turn again, you will have access to those 4 exiled cards. Since in this deck you do generate a ton of mana, usually you will be able to cast any of them. Sadly, if you do hit 2 expensive spells and you aren't able to cast them because you don't have the mana, they will stay in exile forever. Use it or lose it. Icestill Explorer, one of the new cards we got in the Edge of Eternity set. And honestly, this is one of the stronger landfall cards ever printed. The abilities on this thing are absolutely crazy. For 4 mana, you get a 2/4 body that allows you to play an additional land every single turn. The second passive ability allows us to play land cards from our graveyard, which honestly is absolutely crazy in this deck. If this card only had those 2 abilities, I would still easily include it in the deck because that's already really good value for just 4 mana. You get a 2/4 body with an exploration effect attached to it and a Crucible of Worlds effect attached to it. But on top of that, it even has its own landfall ability, which is really easy to trigger thanks to the other 2 passive effects on this card. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under our control, we get to mill a card. As you already saw in the video, we do play a ton of cards in this deck that have some sort of a splendid reclamation effect, allowing us to return all the land cards from our graveyard to the battlefield. Icestill Explorer is just the perfect setup for that. You will be playing a ton of lands in this deck, so you will be milling yourself by a lot when you have this on the battlefield, allowing you to get a ton of lands in your graveyard, and then you can choose to either get them back with a splendid reclamation effect, or if you mill one of your key lands, you can just replay it straight from your graveyard thanks to Icestill Explorer's first passive ability. This card also is the perfect opportunity to mention that cards that allow you to play land cards from your graveyard are just insane with Fetchlands, because you can just play a Fetchland, sacrifice it, get any sort of land from your deck on the battlefield, then you can just replay the Fetchland from your graveyard, use it again, and you can just keep using it over and over again as long as you can drop lands. By doing this, you will filter all the basic lands and all the lands with typings out of your deck, and you will increase the chances of you later in the game actually drawing really relevant creatures, instant sorceries, instead of just drawing lands. Icestill Explorer really is one of the more potent landfall cards we recently got, and I will be even revisiting my Necrobloom deck to see how I can fit this absolute powerhouse in the deck. Oracle of Moldiah, a 4 mana 2/2 creature with an exploration effect attached to it. On top of that, as long as this card is on the battlefield, we play with the top card of our library revealed. And in turn, it also allows us to play land cards from the top of our library, basically giving you some sort of pseudo card advantage because you will be having 1 additional card in your hand, being the top card of your library, if that card is a land, that is. And with effects like this, as long as you have a ton of lands on the top of your library and you can play additional ones of them, you can just keep playing lands from the top of your deck and you will be digging really deep. It's not really card advantage, but it does filter your draws in some ways. Timeless Witness, a 4 mana 2/1 creature that whenever it enters the battlefield allows us to pick 1 card in our graveyard and return it to our hand. This card is an absolute must-have in the deck, because let's say you have an Icestill Explorer on the battlefield and you mill yourself by a ton and you actually mill one of your key creatures or spells. In this deck we do have a ton of ways to recur lands from our graveyard to the battlefield, but we don't have any way to return any instant, sorcery, enchantment, creature, whatever from our graveyard to our hand. So if we do mill one of our more valuable creatures, we don't have any way to recur it. Timeless Witness is the solution for that. Now Panzer, why do you play Timeless Witness over Eternal Witness? It costs 1 mana more. Now that's a very good question, because Timeless Witness has the Eternalize mechanic, meaning whenever this card is in our graveyard, we are allowed to pay 7 mana, exile this creature, and we get to create a 4/4 zombie token copy of it, which will also have the same enter the battlefield trigger. So comparing this to the regular Eternal Witness, we can use this card twice instead of once. And the main reason why we play this over the regular Eternal Witness is because if you play Eternal Witness and you actually mill the Eternal Witness, you also have no way to return it to your hand. With Timeless Witness, you can just keep milling yourself without worrying. If you do mill the Timeless Witness, you can actually still eternalize it to get one of your big cards back into your hand. Scapeshift. Where should I even start with this card? I should probably start by saying this is the best Landfall card ever printed. Period. Whenever we play Scapeshift, we get to sacrifice any amount of lands. Then for every land we sacrificed, we can tutor our deck for any land card and put it onto the battlefield tapped. To make this really simple, let's say you control 7 lands, you can just sacrifice all 7 of those lands and you will be able to tutor your deck for 7 new lands and put them onto the battlefield tapped. And it doesn't just search for basic lands, you can use this to get any land you want from your deck. Scapeshift has many uses in this deck. Obviously, if you do control Tannuk and you play a Scapeshift, Tannuk will deal like 1,000,000 damage to the entire table at once because you will have a ton of lands entering the battlefield. You can also use this to go get any of the utility lands we play straight from our deck onto the battlefield. You can just go fetch up whatever land you need at the given board state. And obviously there's a really well-known combo with Scapeshift and Field of the Dead. I will be going over Field of the Dead more in depth later in this video, but basically if you go fetch up a Field of the Dead plus 6 differently named land cards with Scapeshift, you will get a total of 7 Field of the Dead triggers, because Field of the Dead will enter the battlefield at the same time as the other 6 lands do. This means you will get 7 triggers on Field of the Dead and you will get a total of 7 2/2 zombie tokens instantly after you Scapeshifted, which is just some insane value. In addition to all of the Tannuk triggers and all the other landfall cards we play in this deck. Lumra, Bellow of the Woods. It's a 6 mana vigilance reach creature with power and toughness equal to the amount of lands you control. Usually by the time you can get a Lumra on the battlefield, you will already be controlling more than 8 lands. So Lumra will baseline be an 8/8 creature body, which is honestly really good. Since it has vigilance and reach, it is the perfect blocker. But that huge creature body is not even the reason why we play it. We play it for its enter the battlefield effect. Whenever Lumra enters the battlefield, we get to mill 4 cards, and then we get a free Splendid Reclamation attached to that, returning all our land cards from the graveyard to the battlefield tapped. If you made it this far in the video, you already have an idea of how strong this effect is. We will be sacrificing a ton of our Fetchlands, sacrificing lands to Elvish Reclaimer. We will be milling ourselves. Baseline, we will always have a ton of land cards in our graveyard. And Lumra even adds to that number by milling ourselves whenever he enters the battlefield. Lumra will always generate you an immense amount of value whenever he enters, both by being an immensely huge creature body and just by giving you an immense amount of landfall triggers. What makes Lumra especially good is the fact that we play some tutors in this deck, which only allow us to tutor for creature cards. So if you do have a ton of land cards in your graveyard and you do have the mana available, you can for example use a Green Sun Zenith, just get your Lumra straight from your deck onto the battlefield and you will have all those lands returning from the graveyard to the battlefield. Insane value. Awaken the Woods, a 2 green mana plus X sorcery card. Whenever we play this card, we get to create X 1/1 Forest Dryad tokens. Now I know, why would we play this? We are not a token deck and the value is not that great, just generating some 1/1s. But hear me out, the creatures are actually Forest Dryad tokens. So they do have the forest typing attached to them, meaning whenever one of these tokens enters the battlefield, we actually get a landfall trigger from it, which in this deck, especially in a later section, you will see is absolutely crazy. If you for example have Tannuk on the battlefield and you cast a spell for 12 mana, you will have 10 1/1 Forest Dryads entering the battlefield. This will give you 10 Tannuk triggers, dealing 10 damage to the entire table. Yeah, you can totally use this card combined with Tannuk or any of the other landfall finishers in this deck to just close out the game on the spot. Or even earlier in the game, you can just cast this card for 3 mana, generate you a 1/1 forest that you can tap for mana on a later turn. Really versatile card, a game finisher or an acceleration tool. Nahiri's Lithoforming. I basically view this card as a budget version of Scapeshift. For 2 red mana and X, we get to sacrifice X lands. Then after we've done that, we get to draw X cards and we can play X additional lands this turn. And lands will enter the battlefield tapped this turn. If you have 5 lands on the field, you can play this card for 7 mana, sacrifice all 5 of those lands, draw 5 new cards, and you can play 5 additional lands this turn. Somewhat giving you access to a pseudo Scapeshift. It's a worse card than Scapeshift because you will have to pay more mana for it, and you don't get to tutor your deck for any of those cards. But in return, you do get some card advantage because you will actually be drawing a ton of cards of this card. Even though it's not as good as Scapeshift, Nahiri's lithoforming still is a really potent card in this type of deck. It will allow you to get some lands into your graveyard, which you can then return with any of the Splendid Reclamation effects or with any of the cards that allow you to play lands from the graveyard. It will give you 1,000,000 landfall triggers by allowing you to play the newly drawn lands, and it will just refill your hand later in the game. And the last card in this section is World Soul's Rage. For 2 mana and X, we get a sorcery that deals X damage to any target and allows us to put X lands from our graveyard or our hand straight onto the battlefield tapped. Later in the game, when you do have a ton of mana, you can just invest it in a huge World Soul's Rage and you can use it as either a removal spell for a problematic creature on the battlefield, or you can ping the damage straight to someone's face to just close out the game instantly. In addition to that, this is also some sort of a pseudo Splendid Reclamation effect, just allowing you to return a ton of lands from your graveyard to the battlefield. If you then also have Tannuk or any other landfall creature on the battlefield, this card will deal a ton of damage to the entire table at once, or it will give you a ton of value by giving you 1,000,000 landfall triggers. This card really embodies what Gruul Landfall is all about, dealing a ton of damage and recurring a ton of lands. Quick shout out to all the legends keeping this channel alive. The Panzer MTG YouTube members. Thanks to their support, I can keep making these in-depth deck tech videos every single week. So if you want to join in and get early access to all the deck lists of these decks before the videos go live, access to exclusive chat rooms in the Panzer MTG Discord server, exclusive Panzer MTG emojis you can use anywhere on YouTube or Discord, and monthly polls where you can vote on what type of commander I will do these type of videos about next, click the join button below the video or check out the link in the description below. Next up, we have the win conditions and damage engines. These cards are how we close out games, either by creating tokens, dealing a ton of damage to the entire table at once, or increasing the damage Tannuk already does to the table. Sabotender, a 2 mana 2/1 reach creature. And this card basically does the same thing as Tannuk does. Whenever a land enters a battlefield under our control, it will deal 1 damage to each opponent. This card is just perfect for what we want to do in this deck. Play a ton of lands and ping down the table. It doubles up on the effect of Tannuk and it will double the speed of the clock your opponents are already on. If you have a couple of creatures with this effect on the battlefield at once, every land you play will deal an immense amount of damage to everyone. Springheart Nantuko, a 2 mana 1/1 enchantment creature. And it also has the bestow mechanic for 2 mana. Bestow basically means you can also cast this card for its bestow cost as an aura attached to another creature you control. The bestowed creature will get +1/+1 and the ability that Springheart Nantuko has. Whenever a land enters a battlefield under our control and Springheart Nantuko is attached to a creature, we are able to pay 2 mana. When we do, we get to create a token copy of whatever Springheart Nantuko is attached onto. If we don't pay the mana cost or Springheart Nantuko isn't attached to anything, we get to create a 1/1 insect token instead. First up, let's talk about the bestow ability. If you enchant this onto one of your value creatures for the low cost of 2 mana, you get to create a copy out of any of the value creatures we play in this deck. I'll just give you some examples of how crazy this card can be. Play it on a Timeless Witness and you start copying it. Every time you do, you will be able to recur a card from your graveyard to your hand. Play it on an Elvish Reclaimer, you will be able to get a ton of lands just tutored from your deck because you can actually use the activated ability of the copy you got. Play it on a Traveling Chocobo, you will now get triple the landfall triggers whenever a land card enters the battlefield, including the Springheart Nantuko trigger. Play it on a Lotus Cobra and start copying it. Every land you play will now generate you an immense immense burst of mana. Sadly, you can't use this to copy any legendary creature since you will run into the legend rule, but if you for example copy Alumbra, you will still get the ETB trigger of this effect, but you will have to sacrifice the original or the copy you just created. Obviously, the ability is really great, but in my experience, I have barely ever bestowed this onto a creature. Usually, I just play Springheart Nantico on turn 2 and I just start generating insect tokens whenever I play a land. And honestly, if that was the only ability this card had, it would already be included in the deck. Because we will be playing a ton of lands and just getting a 1/1 insect token whenever we do so is already really great. You can use these tokens to chum block any creature swinging at you, or if you even have enough of these insect tokens, you can just start swinging with them, taking down your opponent's life totals and making it easier to close out the game with our Group Slug effects. Mossborn Hydra, a 3 mana 0/0 creature with trample. Whenever it enters the battlefield, it enters with 1/1/1 counter on it. And whenever a land enters the battlefield under our control, we get to double the amount of counters on this creature. Yeah, I know, we're not a Hydra deck, we're not a counter deck, but hear me out, because this card can just take over games all by itself. In this deck, we will be playing an average of 2 to 3 lands every single turn. The first land we drop, this will be a 2/2 creature, 4 power, 8 power, 16, 32, 64, 128, 265. Yeah, you can do the math. This creature will just easily turn into an immensely huge body by just doing what we already want to do. Play lands. And since this card has trample, your opponents will have to use removal to deal with it. Because if they don't, if they get a 265 power Hydra with trample swinging at them, they will just instantly be taken out of the game. Either they use their removal for this, or they just lose the game. This card is just fantastic in any deck that plays a huge amount of Fetchlands and a deck that can play more than 1 land every single turn. Just imagine having this card on the battlefield, following it up with Escape Shift. Yeah, it's absolutely brutal. Talking about absolutely brutal cards that can take over the game all by themselves, Skewed Swarm. It's a really little cute 3 mana 1/1 insect. And it honestly has a really simple landfall ability. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under our control, we get to create a 1/1 insect token. But if we control 6 or more lands, we get to create a token copy of Skewed Swarm instead. And that's what makes this card absolutely ridiculous, because the token copy will have the same ability as Skewed Swarm. If you control 6 or more lands, first you will have 1 Skewed Swarm. You play a land, you will have 2 Skewed Swarms, 4, 8, 16, 32, 64, 128. Once again, you can do the math. This is another simple 3-drop creature like the previous card, Mossborn Hydra, that can just take over the game all by itself. If your opponents don't have an answer for this card, you will just win the game, because we can easily generate a million landfall triggers and get a gazillion 1/1 insect tokens. Tunneling Geopede, another 3 mana Group Slug / landfall card. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under our control, it deals 1 damage to each opponent. It's the same effect as Tannuk, and the more creatures with an effect like this that we can stack up, the more damage we will be doing with every land we play. Spitfire Lagak, basically the same card as the previous card. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under our control, it deals 1 damage to the entire table. So in total, we play 4 cards in the deck that ping our opponents whenever we play a land. Now let's get into the cards that actually improve this damage. Torbran, Thane of Red Fell, a 4 mana 2/4 dwarf. And this card has a really strong passive effect for any deck that's in red, and that's a Group Slug deck. If any red source we control would deal damage to a permanent or a player, it deals that much damage +2 instead. You can see where we're going with this, right? So let's say we have Tannuk or any of the landfall damage pingers on the battlefield, and we also have a Torbran. Then you follow up by playing a Fetchland, and your Group Slugger will deal 3 damage to every opponent because you just played a land. Then you decide to crack the Fetchland, play another land, and you will deal another 3 damage to the table, equaling in a total of 6 damage dealt by just playing a Fetchland. And this is only doing the calculations with a Fetchland and 1 Group Slugger in play. Because let's say you have Torbran on the battlefield and a Group Slugger, and you then scape shift 8 lands, you will deal a total of 24 damage to every opponent. And that's not even including if you use scape shift to get some Fetchlands and use them to fetch even more lands. Torbegan honestly is just one of the crazier cards in this deck that will turn your small little increments of 1 damage to a huge amount of 3 damage whenever a land enters. Talking about cards that really improve our group slug damage, Ojer Axonil. This card is basically Torbegan but even better. Whenever any red source we control would deal damage to any opponent that's less than Ojer Axonil's power, it will deal damage equal to its power instead. Combine this with our group slug cards and it's even better than Torbegan. Because now when you have a group slug card or Tannuk on the battlefield and you play a land, you will deal a total of 4 damage to each opponent, which is just absolutely ridiculous. Once again, combine this with additional land drops, with Fetchlands, with things like Scapeshift, and Ojer Axonil and any group slugger will just win you the game on the spot. On top of that, if your opponents do manage to deal with this card and remove it, it will just flip and return to the battlefield as a land. And yes, when he gets removed, he actually hits the graveyard and then returns as a land, so this will give you a landfall trigger. Then he returns as Temple of Power. It's a legendary land that taps for 1 red mana and has an activated ability. For 3 mana and tapping it, we can transform it to its front side, Ojer Axonil again. But we can only activate this ability if a red source we control dealt 4 or more non-combat damage this turn. Which honestly in this deck is not hard to do, since we do play Tannuk. If you play any land, you already did 3 non-combat damage because you deal 1 to every single player. You just need 1 more land drop and then you can just get your Ojer back and just close out the game. Auto inclusion in the deck. Gladiolus Amasitia. First up, this card wins the prize of most beautiful card name in the deck. Whenever this 6 mana 6/6 creature enters the battlefield, we get to search our library for any land card and put it on the battlefield tapped. A perfect way to go tutor up any utility land you need at the given time. And since he is in the game finisher section, he also has an absolutely game-winning landfall ability. Whenever any land enters the battlefield under our control, another target creature gets +2/2 and trample until the end of turn. In this type of deck, it's really easy to give any of our creatures somewhere between a 6 to 10 power boost and trample, and we can just swing with it, take our opponent's life totals down, and will make it easier to finish out the game with our group slug cards. Just start buffing up your Tannuk and you will be able to deal a ton of damage. During playtesting, I actually had this dude and Tannuk on the field and I was able to resolve a Scapeshift and sacrifice 10 lands. Then 10 new lands entered the battlefield and Tannuk got a +20/+20 stat boost. I then just swung Tannuk at one of my opponents, he wasn't able to block it and the opponent was instantly taken out of the game on commander damage. Pretty cool card. Morogh, Fury of Akum. This is a card with a really crazy landfall ability. Whenever a land enters a battlefield during one of our main phases, we get an additional combat phase after that one. And at the beginning of that combat phase, we get to untap all our creatures. So this dude will just give you a ton of additional combat phases because the combat phases actually stack with this guy. Let's say it's your first main phase, you play a fetch land, you crack it and another land enters the battlefield, you now will get 2 additional combat phases and then your regular combat phase. You can then just swing with all of your creatures in those additional combat phases, and if during your second main phase you are able to get another land on the battlefield by using a Farseeker or something, you then will get additional combat phases after your second main phase. And he also has a passive ability that will give every creature you control +1/0 for each time it attacks this turn. So the more combat phases you get, the stronger your creatures actually get in each combat phase. A really crazy ability, especially if you combine them with some of the token generating cards in this deck. Talking about token generation, Avenger of Zendikar, a classic landfall game finisher. It's a 7 mana 5/5 creature that whenever it enters a battlefield will generate you a 0/1 plant token for each land you control. Usually by the time that you can play this creature, you will have at least 7 lands on the battlefield and it will generate you at least 7 plant tokens. Now 0/1 plant tokens are pretty useless and that's why they gave this a landfall ability. Whenever a land enters a battlefield under our control, all our plants will get a +1/+1 counter. Avenger of Zendikar is just a card card that has to be dealt with immediately or he will just take over the game. If he enters, he generates you a board filled with creatures, and all of those creature tokens will grow whenever we play a land. And as you've seen by now, we will be playing a ton of lands. And the last card in this section is Omnath, Locus of Rage. Another 7 mana 5/5 elemental creature with an absolutely crazy landfall ability. Whenever a land enters, we get to create a massive 5/5 red and green elemental creature token. These are some huge creature tokens, and once again, if your opponents don't have any answers for Omnath, he will just win you the game. Every fetch land will give you 2 of these 5/5 tokens. If you are able to scapeshift with this on the battlefield, you will get an army of these tokens, and any card that allows us to play additional lands will give us additional 5/5 tokens. That ability alone is enough to include this card in the deck, but it even has another ability. Whenever this creature or any other elemental we controls would die, we get to ping 3 damage to any target, essentially giving us a free lightning bolt. So let's say you have Omnath on the battlefield and an army of these 5/5 elemental tokens, and your opponents decide to do the only right thing at that point. Play a board wipe. Omnath and all of these elementals will be destroyed, but in return you will be able to deal a million damage to any target. Omnath is a really fantastic game closer, and honestly the 7 mana doesn't even matter in this deck because you will get it by turn 4 or turn 5. Next up we have the ramp and acceleration section. These cards help us ramp, fix our colors, and ensure we can drop a land every single turn. A lot of these cards also allow us to get additional lands from our library straight onto the battlefield, and it will translate in us getting additional landfall triggers. Explore, a really simple 2 mana sorcery card. It basically replaces itself because it will draw us a card whenever we cast it, and the turn we cast it we also get to play an additional land. This card basically functions as a temporary explore until the end of turn, allowing us to play a second land and draw an additional card of Tannuk. Farseek. This 2 mana sorcery speed card allows us to search our library for a plains, a swamp, an island, or a mountain. Everything but a forest. Since this card doesn't say we have to go fetch a basic land, we can actually use this to fetch up any of the dual type lands in this deck that have anything but the forest typing. Just some really solid 2 mana acceleration. Into the North. Really similar to Farseek, a 2 mana sorcery that allows us to fetch any snowland we play in the deck and put it onto the battlefield tapped. There is a reason why we play snowlands, and I will be explaining it in the land section of this video. Nature's Lore and 3 Visits. Both cards have exactly the same effect, but they do have a different name, so we can include both of them in the deck. Both are 2 mana sorcery speed spells that allow us to get a forest from our deck and put it onto the battlefield. It doesn't even enter tapped. And once again, these cards don't say basic lands, so you can use this to get the survey lands, the shock lands, the cycle lands, whatever. As long as it has the forest typing, you're good to go. One thing to note about these 2 mana ramp spells is that you sometimes have to hold back and don't use them on turn 2. Sometimes it's better to hold back on these spells until you have Tannuk on the battlefield. So you can use these ramp spells to get your second land drop and actually draw a card of them. Open the Way. Probably one of the strongest and most underrated acceleration spells in the commander format. For 2 green mana and X, you get a sorcery speed spell that allows you to flip the cards off the top of your library until you reveal X land cards. When you cast this, X can be more than the number of players in the game. Usually in a game of Commander, when you cast this, there will still be 4 players in the game, and you will be able to cast this for a maximum of 6 mana, X being 4. When you do so, you just get to flip cards from the top until you hit 4 lands, and you get to put them onto the battlefield tapped. Now I don't know about you, but getting 4 lands for the low price of 6 mana straight from your deck onto the battlefield is absolutely insane. Especially in a deck like this, because it will also translate in you getting 4 landfall triggers. And obviously you can also cast this spell for less than X mana. If you just really desperately need that extra land up, you can just cast it for 3 mana and you'd get 1 land into play for free, both accelerating your mana and giving you that second landfall trigger you might need for Tannuk. The X cost in this card just makes this card incredibly versatile, both allowing you to cast it for a low amount of mana or a really high amount of mana. The value will always be insane. Steve, a simple 2 mana, 1/1 creature with an awesome activated ability. On instant speed, we can just sacrifice this creature, go fetch up any basic land we play in the deck and put it onto the battlefield tapped. 2 mana tutor for a basic land is a really good deal, but the fact that this comes on a 1/1 body actually makes it better. There's a funny thing you can do with Steve. You can just declare him as a blocker if someone is swinging at you with a creature, and before damage you can just sacrifice him, go get that land, and there won't be any damage dealt. The damage will just whiff because there isn't a blocker anymore, it just disappeared. Steve really is a classic green staple for any deck that cares about ramping mana. Talking about snakes, Lotus Cobra. 2 mana, 2/1 snake with an insane landfall ability. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under our control, we get to add 1 mana of any color to our mana pool. If you've never seen this card, your world is about to change because this card is absolutely crazy. Whenever you play a land, you just get to add 1 mana to your mana pool, which in itself is already really crazy. This deck has an insane number of synergies in this deck. You play a fetch land, you crack it for another land, Lotus Cobra will now add 2 free mana to your mana pool. You have Lotus Cobra on the field and you play an Open the Way, getting 4 lands onto the battlefield tapped. Lotus Cobra will now add 4 mana to your mana pool. You play Escape Shift with Lotus Cobra on the battlefield, getting you 10 lands. Lotus Cobra will now add 10 mana to your mana pool. You play a Lumra and you have 8 lands in your graveyard. Lotus Cobra will now add 8 mana to your mana pool. Lotus Cobra is just an insane creature in any landfall based deck. Just the synergy with Fetchlands alone makes this card incredibly valuable. Nissa, Resurgent Animist. This card basically has the same effect as Lotus Cobra, but it costs 1 mana more and it has an additional upside. So whenever a land enters, we get to add 1 mana of any color to our mana pool, but if it is the second time this ability resolved in this turn, we also get an additional effect. We get to reveal the top cards from our library until we hit an elf or an elemental card. When we do, we then get to put that card into our hand, essentially giving us some card advantage, or getting the really valuable elves and elementals we play in this deck into our hand. The elementals are Lumra, Omnat, Avenger of Zendikar, Mossborn Hydra, and Ancient Green Warden. All really huge creatures that can close out the game. And for the elves, we have Oracle of Muldaya, Elvish Reclaimer, Aftermath Analyst, and Disciple of Realize, which once again are some really relevant targets to hit with Nissa. Nissa is just a fantastic card and a really upgraded version of Lotus Cobra, and all the synergies I just explained with Lotus Cobra also all apply to Nissa. And the last cards in this section are Entish Restoration and Harrow. Both are 3 mana instant speed spells that allow you to sacrifice a land card whenever you play them. When you do so, you get to search your library for 2 basic land cards and put them onto the battlefield. The reason why we play these cards is because 1, we want to actually get lands into our graveyard since we can replay them anyways from there, and these cards are instant speed, so you can just get a Tannuk trigger during your own turn and then play one of these cards during an opponent's turn. You will have 2 lands entering and you will get to draw a card of Tannuk. Entish Restoration has the benefit that if we control a creature with power 4 or more when we cast it, we actually get to fetch up 3 basic lands, and Harrow has the benefit that the lands don't even enter tapped. Next up, we have the support and card advantage section. These are the cards that didn't fit into any of the other categories, but they really make the deck work. They really glue together our game plan and they synergize really well with everything we want to do in this deck. And even though we play Tannuk, Gruul has a really hard time actually drawing cards, so we do play a couple of card advantage cards in the deck. Crop Rotation. I know I've said this a lot, but this card is insane for any sort of landfall deck. Recently, it even got changed into a game changer card just because it is that strong. For 1 mana on instant speed, we get to sacrifice any land and then tutor up any land in our deck straight onto the battlefield. It doesn't have to be a basic land and it doesn't even enter tapped. As I mentioned before, sacrificing lands in this deck isn't really a downside since we can just cast them from the graveyard later anyways. And you can view this as some sort of a land tutor you can use on instant speed to get any of your utility lands straight from your deck to the battlefield. Someone is trying to spot remove your commander, you can just Crop Rotation, get a Talongates of Madara and make that creature phase out, serving as some sort of a protection tool. You got a Tannuk trigger during your own turn and you pass to an opponent, you can just Crop Rotation one of your lands, go get a fetch land, tap it, crack it, get another land, and you will get another Tannuk trigger. You have a ton of mana but no way to close out the game, just sacrifice a land, go get a Kessig Wolfrun and you will win the game. Green Sun Zenith. Zenith. For 1 green mana plus X, you get a tutor card that will tutor any green creature from your deck straight onto the battlefield. The mana value of the creature just has to be less than what you paid for X. Its commander, it's a 100 card singleton format. Tutors will always be really good. If you need a splendid reclamation effect, just go tutor up your Lumra. If you have a ton of lands but no board pressure, just go tutor up an Avenger of Zendikar. Doesn't really matter what board state you're in, Green Sun Zenith will always provide you with value. You can just get what you need at the given board state. And this card also combines really well with Dryad Arbor, because let's say on turn 1 you have a Green Sun Zenith in your hand, you can actually cast it for 1 green mana and X being 0, and you can get Dryad Arbor straight from your deck onto the battlefield, since it is a 0 mana land creature. This will allow you to accelerate your mana as soon as turn 1. Green Sun Zenith will just shuffle into your library after casting it anyway, so it won't even be lost in your graveyard. Now that we're talking about tutors, Worldly Tutor. For 1 green mana on instant speed, we get to search our library for any creature card and put it on top of our deck. As I just explained, tutors will always be really good in a 100 card singleton format. And we had the space to play 1 additional game changer in the deck anyways, not going over the threshold of 3 game changers. Keen Sense, a 1 mana enchant creature card, and probably one of the best synergy cards with Tannuk. Whenever the enchanted creature deals damage to a player, we may draw a card. The value this card will generate you when you attach it to Tannuk or any of your Group Slug creatures is just insane. Let's say you have Tannuk on the field and this is attached to him. Then you decide to play a land. Tannuk will deal 1 damage to each opponent. Then this card will give you 3 triggers and you will be able to draw 3 cards. Whenever this card is attached to a Group Slug creature, it basically says Landfall, draw 3, which is absolutely ridiculous value. If you can just play a Fetchland with this on the battlefield, the Fetchland will draw you a total of 6 cards, which is just absolutely unseen value. It's completely broken, honestly. If your opponents can't answer this, this will win you the game. And the nice thing is that it is a may trigger. It's not a must trigger, so you can't actually deck yourself with this. If you are running low on cards, you don't even have to draw cards. You can just decide to draw a ton of cards, discard them at the end step, just discard a ton of lands, and then use a splendid reclamation effect to get them back to the battlefield. The options and value you get from this card is absolutely insane. Collector, oof! A 2 mana, 2/2 creature with a really annoying ability. Activated abilities of artifacts can't be activated. Now this card might seem really weird and really out of place in a Landfall deck like this, but hear me out. First up, we don't play any artifact cards ourselves, so this is just a one-sided effect for our opponents. Whatever we want to do in this deck won't be bothered by the oppressive effect that Collector Oof has. Nowadays, in modern day Magic, 95% of decks rely on using treasure tokens. For as long as you have Collector Oof on the battlefield, your opponents can't actually use treasure tokens for mana. And this is way more relevant in an actual game of Magic than it seems in this video. I can't emphasize enough how important treasure tokens are nowadays. And it doesn't even stop there. Someone is playing an artifact deck, as long as you control Collector Oof, they're just sitting at the table like this. You're playing versus a dragon player that relies on having like 6 mana rocks to produce mana, they can't use them anymore. Someone is playing a Balin deck and has an Academy Manufacturer, their food, clue and treasure tokens all don't work anymore. You're playing versus an equipment deck, your opponents can't equip any equipment to their creatures anymore because equipping something is an activated ability of an artifact. The amount of times I was playing a game, had this on the battlefield and someone decided to tap their treasures for mana and I had to do like this. Hello, I have a Collector Oof. And them just being mad at me but resulting in me winning the game are absolutely endless. Sylvan Library. Probably one of the strongest 2 mana enchantments ever printed. As I mentioned before, Gruul really has a hard time drawing cards. We do have Tannuk to help us out with that, but we can't always rely on controlling our commander. Sylvan Library will give you an insane amount of card advantage, and just let me explain to you how it works because it's worded in a really weird way. At the beginning of our draw step, we get to draw an additional 2 cards. So this translates into us every single draw step drawing 3 cards instead of just 1. Then we have to choose 2 of the 3 cards we drew this way in our draw step. For every single one of them, we have to pay 4 life or we have to put it back on top of our library. You can basically view Sylvan Library as a card that says draw 2 additional cards, but you have to pay 4 life for each one of them you decide to keep. And obviously a 2 mana enchantment that will draw you 2 cards every single turn for the low cost of 8 life is absolutely insane. Life is a resource anyways, people. use it. Rydia, Summoner of Mist. This is a really awesome card from the new Final Fantasy set that I didn't even notice until I started building this deck. The landfall ability is really weird, but really good in this type of deck. Whenever a land enters a battlefield under our control, we get the option to loot, meaning we can discard a card to then draw a card. You can just start tossing land cards from your hand into your graveyard and refilling your hand with new cards you actually need. Since we will be playing a ton of lands in this deck, you will be able to loot a ton and dig really deep into your library. And as a result of the looting, you will also have an immense amount of lands in your graveyard. Then, because you are able to dig this deep into the deck, you can easily get one of the splendid reclamation effects we play in the deck. Just play it and return all the lands you discarded straight to the battlefield. Absolutely crazy. It also has an activated ability, something related to sagas or whatever, but we don't play any sagas in the deck, so I won't be covering it. Archdruid's Charm. For 3 mana, you get an instant speed spell with some absolutely insane options. The first option allows us to tutor any creature card in our deck straight to our hand, or any land card from our deck straight to the battlefield. Tutors are really good, and this both functions as a land tutor and a creature tutor. The second option allows us to put a +1/+1 counter on target creature, and then it deals damage equal to its power to target creature. You can use this to buff up any of your creatures and then make it remove any other creature you don't like on the battlefield. Excellent removal. And the last option allows you to exile any target artifact or enchantment on the battlefield. If someone has Heuristic Study and Aura Shards, this card allows you to deal with that. Honestly, all of the options on this card are great. A tutor, creature removal, or artifact or enchantment hate. Agaminap Excavator, a simple 3 mana snake creature that allows us to play land cards from our graveyard. As I mentioned before, cards like this are just incredible when combined with Fetchlands. You can just keep replaying them and filter lands out of your deck and getting 2 landfall triggers per turn. Or if you mill yourself and you do have a ton of land cards in your graveyard, you can just start replaying them from there. Another really similar card is Walking Closet and Forgotten Cellar, a room card from the Duskmourn set. When you play a room spell, you can decide which part of the room you cast. The other one will then be locked, and you can unlock it by paying the mana cost of the room whenever this enchantment is on the battlefield. The left side is a 3 mana enchantment that also allows you to play land cards from your graveyard. And the right side is a 5 mana enchantment that basically acts as some sort of a Yawgmoth's Will. Whenever we unlock it, we can cast any spell from our graveyard until the end of turn. If we do decide to cast any of those cards from our graveyard, they will be exiled. Yeah, what can I say? This card is just perfect for the deck. Early in the game, it just gives us access to a card that allows us to play lands from the grave, and later in the game, it gives us access to our entire graveyard, which is absolutely bananas. If your opponents did manage to deal with some of your big creatures, they did manage to remove some of your lands, or you're just milling yourself and your entire deck is in your graveyard, you can just activate this room and recast any of the key cards straight from your graveyard. Snake Umbra, a 3 mana enchant creature card that has the exact same effect as Keen Senses. Attach this simple enchantment to any of the Group Slug creatures you control, and whenever you play a land, you get to draw 3 cards. On top of that, it also has the totem armor mechanic, meaning if the creature this is attached to would be destroyed, we get to destroy this enchantment instead and the creature will survive. A perfect card to attach to Tannuk to generate an insane amount of value, and whenever your opponents play spot removal or a board wipe, this will be destroyed instead of Tannuk, serving as both a card that generates an immense amount of card advantage and a protection tool for Tannuk. Traveling Chocobo. This is by far the strongest card we got in the entire Final Fantasy set. Change my mind. For 3 mana, we get a 3/2 bird that allows us to look at the top card of our library at any given time. And it allows us to play lands and birds from the top of our library. This is the only bird we play in the deck, but playing lands off the top is really good. I already explained how crazy that can get in this deck. And here comes the best part. Whenever a land entering the battlefield would trigger any ability of a permanent we control, it will trigger an additional time. It's okay, just let that sink in. Obviously, this ability is insane in this deck. I'll give you some examples. You have this and Tannuk on the field, you play 1 land, you will get 2 Tannuk triggers, and it will be the second time that the ability resolves in a turn. So you will always draw a card with Tannuk from just dropping 1 land. If you play 5 lands with Tannuk and this on the field, it will deal 10 damage to each opponent. The plants of Avenger of Zendikar will get double the counters, Omnath will generate double the elementals, Field of the Dead will generate double the zombies, and Mossborn Hydra will get double the counters. And there are probably a million more interactions in the deck that I didn't even mention. Traveling Chocobo is just an insane card and it is a must-have in any type of landfall deck. No matter what commander you play, include this card if you are playing landfall. Valakut Exploration, a 3 mana enchantment with landfall. Whenever a land enters, we get to exile the top card of our library. And we are allowed to play that card for as long as it remains exiled. So every time you drop a land, you get access to 1 additional card in your deck. With Fetchlands, you get 2, giving us some sort of pseudo card advantage. At the beginning of our end step, if any number of cards are exiled by disenchantment, we get to put them into our graveyard. Then Valakut Exploration will deal damage to each player equal to the number of cards we put into our graveyard, functioning as some sort of a group slug card. So both generates a card advantage and will ping down the table. And obviously, since this is a red permanent, it scales perfectly well with Torberan and Ojer. There's a neat little trick you can do with this card, and that is cracking Fetchland or fetching any sort of land during an opponent's turn. Because then you will also exile the top card, but they only get put into your graveyard at the beginning of your end step. So next turn, after you untap, you still have access to the exiled cards, giving you a really good form of card advantage. Ancient Green Warden, a 6 mana 5/7 reach creature that basically has Crucible of Worlds attached to it, allowing us to play land cards from our graveyard. And it has the same effect as Traveling Chocobo does. Whenever a land entering the battlefield would cause any trigger of a permanent we control, we get an additional trigger. I won't be explaining all the benefits this has in the deck, just go back to Traveling Chocobo and check the insane value there. A perfect late game creature that will generate you an immense amount of value, and it will make sure you are able to close out the game. And the last card in this section is one of the MDFC lands from Modern Horizons, Disciple of Realize. It's a 6 mana 3/3 creature that whenever it enters a battlefield gives us the option to sacrifice another creature. When we do, we get to draw X cards and gain X life, X being the sacrificed creature's power. It's an awesome creature that we can use to sacrifice any of the creatures we don't need anymore or any of the creature tokens we generate in this deck, be it tokens from Omnath, zombies from Field of the Dead, whatever. The real reason that I decided to include it in this deck is because you can also play the backside of this card, which is a land. Simple land, taps for green mana, even enters untapped if you pay 3 life, functioning somewhat as a basic forest. There really is no downside to including any of these MDFC cards in this deck. Just be warned, you can't use land tutors to actually go get this card, because when this card is in your deck, it's actually a creature and not a land. Dual-faced cards always only have the typing of their front side whenever they're not on the battlefield. Next up, we have the protection and interaction section. These are the cards that help us keep Tannuk and any of our value creatures on the battlefield and help us deal with problematic permanents on the board. Since we are in Gruul colors, we don't really have access to really good interaction or protection spells, so this is a really small package. But that being said, all the cards in this section are really efficient. Insidious Fungus, a 1 mana 1/2 creature with an activated ability that has 3 options. For 2 mana and sacrificing this card, we can either draw a card and play an additional land this turn, destroy target enchantment, or destroy target artifact. So both the card that helps us deal with any problematic enchantments or artifacts on the battlefield, be it Heuristic Study, Phyrexian Altar, Aura Shards, or if we don't have anything on the battlefield to deal with, we can just use it for some card advantage and to play an additional land. Once again, I just really love cards that give you options. Heroic Intervention, a 2 mana instant speed spell that will give all our permanents hexproof and indestructible until the end of turn. The biggest weakness of this deck is your key creatures actually getting removed by board wipes or by spot removal. If you can't get any of your value creatures to stick to the board, it doesn't even matter that you can drop lands, because you won't have anything to get landfall triggers with. Heroic Intervention is just a really efficient card that will protect your board from basically anything. Hull Breach, a 2 mana sorcery speed spell that gives us one of 3 options. options. We can destroy an enchantment, we can destroy an artifact, or we can destroy both an enchantment and an artifact. The value you get is honestly pretty insane for just 2 mana, especially if you have both an enchantment and an artifact you can target with this. Beast Within, a 3 mana instant speed spell that allows us to destroy any permanent on the battlefield. You can even target lands with this, so if you are playing versus another Landfall player, you can use this to remove their Field of the Dead, for example. In return, the destroyed permanent's controller will get a 3/3 beast token. But removing someone's Ur-Dragon for a 3 mana spell and giving them a 3/3 beast in return is honestly always a really good deal. Bridgeworks Battle, another MDFC card we play in this deck. For 3 mana, you can give one of your creatures +2/2 until the end of turn, and then it fights a creature we don't control, essentially making it function as some sort of a removal spell. This card is just perfect to remove people's commander with. If, for example, you're playing versus a Kagalov player and he's just holding Kagalov back, just using him as a value engine to remove everything, whenever he lost his counters, just cast this on Tannuk, he will have 4 power, he then will fight with Karlov and you will be able to remove it. The backside is just a land that taps for green mana, and it even enters untapped whenever you pay 3 life for this. And the last card in this section is Blasphemous Act, a 9 mana sorcery speed spell that will deal 13 damage to each creature on the battlefield. Now 9 mana for this effect is a really bad deal, but the cost of this card is reduced by 1 generic mana for each creature on the battlefield. Usually you need a board wipe when the board is filled with creatures, and you will be able to cast this massive damage spell for just 1 mana. Now we are a creature based deck ourselves, and it's really weird to include a board wipe, but sometimes your opponents will just overwhelm you on the board and you just have to hit the reset button or you will lose the game. Fun fact, if you have Heroic Intervention and a Blasphemous Act, you can just Heroic Intervention, make everything indestructible, cast a Blasphemous Act, and it will be a one-sided board wipe. Before we get into the most important section of this video, the lands, there's something I want to share with you. Recently in the Discord server, I asked for feedback on how I could improve the things behind me, my actual background. And one of the earliest members in the Discord, Mishkin, came up with a great idea. He said, why don't you just draw the commander that you are doing a video about? So I did. And for the entire video, you have been looking at this absolute masterpiece. A completely hand-drawn version of Tannuk. I know it's bold, it generates a lot of emotions when you look at it, but that's what great art should do. If for whatever reason you want to be the owner of this beautiful and unique Panzer MTG art piece, hit me up, I'll cram it into an envelope and I'll send it directly to your home. And who knows, in a couple of years this might be worth a ton of money. Either way, enjoy the art. You're welcome. Next up we have the land section. In most decks, lands are just used to generate mana, but in this deck they generate value, they deal damage, and they win us games. Boseiju Who Endures. This is a legendary land that taps for green mana, doesn't even enter tapped. And for 2 mana it has the channel ability, meaning we can discard this to destroy any artifact or enchantment on the battlefield, and its controller gets to search their library for a basic land card and put it into play. So a card that we can both play as a land or use as some sort of an interaction tool to actually deal with some problematic cards on the battlefield. Boseiju is a really expensive card, but it is totally worth it. Your opponents can't even counter this effect because a channel ability is an activated ability and you don't cast this spell. Dryad Arbor, a card that's both a land and a creature at the same time. Whenever you play this card, it will enter as a 1/1 creature, but it has the forest typing, so it will actually trigger Landfall. As I mentioned before in the video, this card is just incredible with Green Sun Zenith, because you can play Green Sun Zenith on turn 1, just go get a Dryad Arbor and you will accelerate your mana as early as turn 1. Or later in the game, if someone is swinging a 10/10 creature at you, you can use an effect like Elvish Reclaimer, for example, sacrifice a land, get a Dryad Arbor into play, and you will have a blocker. The downside of this land is whenever your opponents play a board wipe, you will actually lose the Dryad Arbor. Field of the Dead, aka the most broken land ever printed. This land will enter the battlefield tapped, and it will tap for 1 colorless mana. But the passive ability on this land is absolutely crazy, especially for landfall decks. Whenever Field of the Dead or another land enters the battlefield and we control 7 or more differently named lands, we get to create a 2/2 zombie token. Now this effect might seem really weak when I say it like this, but it is absolutely busted. As you've seen in this video, we do play a ton of effects to get lands from our hand or our deck or our graveyard into play or whatever. And Field of the Dead just is a win con printed on a land. Getting to 7 lands in this deck is incredibly easy. And from that point on, whenever any land enters a battlefield, you will get a 2/2 zombie token. These tokens can be used as fantastic blockers, but if Field of the Dead sticks around on the battlefield for a couple of turns, you will be able to generate enough zombies to actually take someone out of the game with. Play and crack a fetch land, you now get 2/2 zombies. Return a ton of lands to the battlefield with Lumira, you will get an army of zombies. And the best part about this card is how good it actually is with Scapeshift. If, for example, you are able to cast a Scapeshift and sacrifice 7 lands, you can get 7 new lands. Since whenever you resolve Scapeshift, all 7 lands will enter at the same time, and Field of the Dead actually sees all of them entering. So whenever you Scapeshift into 7 lands and one of them is Field of the Dead, you will get a total of 7 2/2 zombie tokens, which is honestly, once again, insane value. Just the fact that you can get a win con on something as simple as a land makes this card incredibly busted, and it's totally justified they made this card into a game changer. Ghost Quarter, a land that taps for a colorless mana, and it also has an activated ability. We can tap and sacrifice Ghost Quarter and destroy any land on the battlefield. Then the controller of the destroyed land gets to search their library for a basic land card and put it onto the battlefield. You can both use this to remove some of the problematic lands your opponents have. You can use this against multicolor decks to destroy their multicolor lands and make them unable to cast their spells. Or you can even target your own lands with this just to get a Ghost Quarter and a land in the graveyard if you're about to cast a Lumira or something, and you will get to fetch a basic land, and this will give you the second land drop to get a Tannuk trigger from. Pretty awesome inclusion in the deck, especially if you have cards that allow you to play lands from your graveyard. You can just start destroying all lands your opponents control. They will run out of basic lands to fetch at some point. Ghost Town. This land will tap for a colorless mana and has a pretty weird activated ability. For 0 mana, we can return this land to our hand, but we can only activate it during an opponent's turn. As I mentioned in the beginning of the video, you will be able to drop 5 lands every single turn. That's really easy to do. The problem is that you just won't have the amount of land cards in your hand to actually do so. So if you really desperately need a land card in your hand to get a Tannuk trigger or a Landfall trigger or whatever, you can just return this to your hand and you will have a land to play. Before making this deck, I didn't even knew this weird little land existed. Horizon of Progress, an awesome land with 3 abilities. We can tap it, pay 1 life, and we get to add 1 mana of any color that any of our other lands can produce to our mana pool. So basically giving us access to both our colors. For 3 mana and tapping it, we are allowed to put a land card from our hand onto the battlefield. This is a really awesome way to get additional land drops and even get lands into play during an opponent's turn. And the last ability, for 1 mana and tapping it, we can sacrifice this land to draw a card, just giving us some solid card advantage. If you then have any cards on the battlefield that allow you to play lands from your graveyard, you can just return this to the battlefield, sacrifice it again, and then you have a way to generate some recurring card advantage. Kessig Wolfrun. This is a land that I mentioned a lot throughout the video. Taps for a colorless and it has an activated ability. You can pump mana into this, tap this, and target creature you control will get +X0 and trample until the end of turn. Kessig Wolfrun is a really awesome land that can just pump your creatures over the top and you will be able to swing with them, trample over any blocking creatures, and you will be able to deal a huge amount of damage. Shifting Woodland, a land that taps for green mana and it even enters untapped whenever you control a forest. This card has the Delirium ability, meaning that you can only activate this when you have 4 different card types in your graveyard. The card types are Artifact, Creature, Planeswalker, Enchantment, and probably a couple other ones. When you do, you can pay 4 mana and this land will become a copy of any permanent in your graveyard until the end of turn. If later in the game, for example, you milled your own Omnath or someone removed your Omnath, you can just copy Omnath from your graveyard onto this land and then you can start dropping lands and generating elemental tokens. You can also use it to copy any of the Group Slug cards in your graveyard, then start dropping lands to deal some insane damage. Shifting Woodland basically has no downsides to include in the deck, but later in the game, in some fringe situations, you might copy something useful and actually win the game that way. Strip Mine. Cards don't get any more simple than this. It's a land that taps for colorless, or you can tap it and sacrifice it to destroy any land on the battlefield. This card just has insane synergy with cards that allow you to play additional lands and cards that allow you to play lands lands from your graveyard. Or Icestill Explorer, which has both of those effects on one card. If for example you have an Exploration and an Icestill Explorer, you can just play a Strip Mine, sacrifice it, destroy a land, play it again, sacrifice it, destroy a land, play it again, sacrifice it, destroy a land, and you will be able to destroy a huge amount of lands every single turn, really crippling your opponents. It's not the most fun card for your opponents to deal with, but I really love the synergy it has in this deck. Talongates of Madara. Whenever this land enters the battlefield, one creature phases out, meaning it won't exist in the game until your next upkeep. This effect is obviously insanely strong, because you can just phase out your commander and no one can interact with it until it's your turn again. And you can also use this on your opponent's creatures. If someone, for example, has a Purphoros and a Kerenko on the field, and whenever they would tap Kerenko, they will just win the game instantly, play your Talongates, Kerenko will phase out and you will be gone until your next upkeep. And on top of that, this land also has an activated ability we can use for 4 generic mana whenever this is in our hand. Just pay 4 and you can put this land onto the battlefield on instant speed, allowing you to phase out any creature on instant speed and allowing you to get landfall triggers on instant speed, which is really insane. Talongates of Madara is a really underrated card and can be included in a ton of decks. It's just that strong of a land. Urza's Cave. This land taps for a colorless mana, and for 3 mana, tapping it, sacrificing it, we get to search our library for any land card and put it onto the battlefield tapped. A land tutor on a land. This is just a perfect way to get your Field of the Dead, your Talongates of Madara, or any other utility land you need at the given time. Vesuva. This land enters the battlefield as a copy of any other land on the battlefield. The main reason why we play this is just to copy our Field of the Dead and have 2 copies of it. So whenever we play a land, then we will get 2 2/2 zombie tokens instead of the 1. And obviously, if you don't have any good utility lands to copy with this effect, you can just copy any of your other lands and it's still a land entering the battlefield that will tap for mana. Earlier in the video, I talked about Field of the Dead and Scapeshift as a combo piece to just get 7 lands and get 7 triggers on Field of the Dead. When you do get Vesuva and Field of the Dead with 1 Scapeshift, you can't actually make Vesuva enter as a Field of the Dead because it can only copy lands that are already on the battlefield. Yavimaya, Cradle of Growth. A legendary land that will make sure every land on the battlefield is a forest in addition to its other types. What this basically does is make sure that every land on the battlefield, even the ones your opponents control, can be tapped for green mana. This helps us with color fixing, but more importantly, it allows us to tap our Fetchlands for mana. Later in the game, you will be able to get your Fetchlands on the field, but you won't have any targets to fetch up anymore because they will always be on the battlefield. If you don't have a Yavimaya, you can't do anything with your Fetchlands anymore since these lands don't actually tap for mana. But with Yavimaya, you can actually still use them for mana. Over the course of the video, I know I've been talking about the Fetchlands a lot, but they're just really insane value in any sort of landfall deck because they will give you 2 landfall triggers whenever you play and crack them, and they allow you to filter your deck of any lands that has the basic land type. That's why we play 7 of these. We also play 1 Surveil land. This land enters tapped, but it does have the 2 basic land types, so you can actually use Fetchlands to fetch this land up. And the Surveil trigger is pretty nice because if you Surveil, hit a land, you can just toss it in your graveyard and you can recur it later with any Splendid Reclamation effect. We also play a Command Tower, which is just, a land that enters untapped and taps for both of our colors. We play a Stomping Ground, has both a mountain and forest type, so we can actually use Fetchlands to fetch this up. We play a Filter Land just to get our colors fixed. Cinderglade, another dual land with both land types, so we can fetch it up and it enters untapped if we control 2 or more basic lands. Shelter Ticket, one of the cycle lands. We can also use Fetchlands to fetch this up thanks to the basic land typings. And later in the game, if it is stuck in our hand and we really need some card draw, just pay 2 mana, discard it, and you get to draw a card. Whenever you discard it, it is in your graveyard and you can use any of the effects in this deck to recur it to the battlefield later. Gruul Turf, one of the bounce lands. This land will enter the battlefield tapped, but it taps for 2 mana. Whenever it enters the battlefield, we have to return another land we control to our hand. In this deck, this is actually a benefit because we will have some extra fodder to play later in the game to get extra landfall triggers. One of the Verge lands, just an excellent way to fix our colors. One of the Snow Dual lands because this has the land typings and can be fetched up. And we can also use Into the North to go tutor this out of our deck. 5 Snow Forests and 2 Snow Mountains. We actually play snow lands in this deck for cards like Into the North and a mountain and a snow-covered mountain actually have a different name which might be relevant for Field of the Dead. Don't worry, snowlands are also basic lands and you can use Sakura Tribe Elder to fetch these out of your deck. And for regular basics we play 1 mountain and 1 forest. Next up we have the considering section. These are 10 cards I wanted to include in the deck but I couldn't fit them in, or I have other reasons to not include them. Emergence Zone. This is a land that taps for colorless mana but has a really awesome activated ability for this type of deck. For 1 mana, tapping it and sacrificing it, we can cast spells this turn as though they had flash. It basically allows us to cast any spell during our opponent's turn. This obviously is really good with Tannuk because you can play 2 lands in your own turn, draw a card of him, and you can just crack this land during an opponent's turn and you will be able to use any of the spells in this deck to also play 2 lands during their turn and draw more cards. You can Scapeshift during an opponent's turn, you can Lumra during an opponent's turn, you can use World Soul's Rage during an opponent's turn. Really solid value, and you can keep recurring this land from your graveyard to the battlefield so you can use it over and over again. That being said, the reason I didn't include it is because this deck is really hungry for basic lands. So I actually cut this land to include another basic land. Sylvan Safekeeper, a 1 mana 1/1 elf with a really good ability. We can sacrifice a land to this creature and target creature will get Shroud until the end of turn. So basically if your opponents have any spot removal and they want to use it to remove your commander or any of your value creatures, you can just sack a land, give it Shroud and the spell will fizzle. In my Necrobloom deck, this is one of the best cards included. But in Necrobloom, it's really easy to recur lands you sacrifice from your graveyard to the battlefield. In this deck, it's a little harder to do so, and every time I playtest during playtesting, it just didn't feel right for the deck. Wrenn and 6, a 2-drop Planeswalker. Now the reason why Wrenn and 6 is good in any deck is because it is really crazy when you combine it with Fetchlands. Since this +1 ability allows you to pick any land card from your graveyard and put it into your hand. So you can just crack a fetch, get a land, play Wrenn and 6, get the fetch back, and you will be able to use it again. Just keep recurring the fetch lands and you will be able to filter your deck and get a huge amount of landfall triggers. That being said, during playtesting, Wrenn and 6 felt really underwhelming. Every time I played this on turn 2, or it got destroyed because someone was swinging their mana dorks at it, or the impact on the game was just way too small. Valakut and Dryad of the Elysian Grove. Valakut is honestly one of the strongest lands ever printed, but you do need to play a ton of cards with the mountain type for it. Whenever a mountain enters a battlefield under your control and you control at least 5 other mountains and Valakut, you are able to ping 3 damage to any target. For example, when you Scapeshift, you sacrifice 10 lands and you decide to get a Valakut and 9 other lands, you will be able to deal a total of 27 damage to any target. Usually this is enough to take someone out of the game instantly. That being said, in this deck, we didn't play enough mountains to include the Valakut. I also tested Dryad of the Elysian Grove because he will give every land you control every basic land type, including mountain, which is great with Valakut. But because I decided to not play Valakut, I also decided to cut the Dryad and include a card like Loot over it instead. Tireless Provisioner, a classic 3-drop landfall card. It's a classic card because it has an insane ability. Whenever a land enters a battlefield under our control, you get to create a treasure token. Obviously, like Nissa and Lotus Cobra, this is just insane mana acceleration, especially if you combine this with Fetchlands. But because I decided to go with Collector Oof, which actually shuts down treasure tokens, I decided to exclude this card from the deck. If you don't like playing Collector Oof, you can just cut him for a Tireless Provisioner. Seer's Sundial, a 4 mana artifact with a landfall ability. Whenever a land enters a battlefield under our control, we can pay 2 generic mana to draw a card. On paper, this card looks really good and I was really excited about playing it in the deck. But during playtesting, it felt really underwhelming, and every time I resolved this, I just felt like I've wasted 4 mana. It's just way too slow and it doesn't really feel good in the deck. This might just be me, but I really didn't like the card. Overlord of the Houndwoods, an enchantment creature with the impending mechanic. Impending 4 basically means that you can cast it for its impending cost, 3 mana, and it will enter the battlefield as an enchantment, not a creature. It will get 4 counters, and at the beginning of your end step, you get to remove 1 counter. When all counters are removed, it will also be a creature. Whenever this card enters, be it as a creature or an enchantment, we get to create a land that is everything. The land has all basic land types and can be tapped for any color. A pretty good way to accelerate your mana for 3 mana by creating a new land and also getting a landfall trigger. But once again, during playtesting, this card felt really underwhelming. I actually never got to the point that all counters were removed and this was a creature and also generated land tokens on attack. I still think this card might have some real potential in the deck, but it just didn't feel right for me. Summon Titan, a 5 mana saga creature. It's a massive 7/7 reach trample body and it functions in the same way as a saga does. When it enters the battlefield, you get to mill 5 cards. Pretty good filling our graveyard. Let's hope it's with lands. At the beginning of our next upkeep, this will get a lore counter and we get a free Splendid Reclamation, returning all our lands from the graveyard to the battlefield tapped. And whenever it gets its third lore counter, target creature we control will get +X and trample until the end of turn. X being the amount of lands we control. Now on paper, this looks really good because you get to mill, you get to return lands, you get to buff a creature to close out the game. But during playtesting, this card was just horrible. Because we have cards like actual Splendid Reclamation, which whenever you cast it, you actually immediately get the benefit. With this card, you play him and you get nothing. You actually have to wait a turn to get a second lore counter. If your opponents manage to bounce it, remove it, play a board wipe, you just get absolutely nothing for the 5 mana. And the last and the most expensive card that I considered for the deck is Famished Worldshire, a new card from Edge of Eternities. And let's be honest, the art on this is just fantastic. It's a whopping 8 mana 0/0 creature with Devour Land 3, meaning whenever this card enters the battlefield, you get to sacrifice any amount of lands and this creature will enter with 3 +1/+1 counters for every land you sacrificed. So it will always enter as a huge creature body. Whenever this creature enters, we get to look at the top X cards of our library. X being the amount of power this creature has. Then we can put any land cards of those cards onto the battlefield tapped, resulting in an insane amount of lands entering the battlefield, functioning somewhat as a scapeshift. On paper, this looks really good, but in reality, it's just a really wonky creature body that doesn't even have trample. So it doesn't matter that it's like at 50 power, your opponents can just block it with a 1/1 squirrel token. And the ETB effect obviously is really good, but if you want that sort of effect, it's way better to run a Genesis wave. You can cast it for more, you don't have to sacrifice lands, and it even puts other permanents on the battlefield. And that's it for my Tannuk in-depth deck tech. It's a Gruul landfall engine that turns every land drop into damage, every fetch land into card draw, and every ram spell into a slow burn for the entire table. If you're still watching, drop a mountain emoji in the comments below so I know you're a part of the end game crew of these type of videos. Share this video with your entire family, even with your grandma, hit the like button, hit subscribe, and hit the bell notification icon so you don't miss a single one of these awesome in-depth deck tech commander videos. I upload one of these every single week. Thanks for watching and I'll see you in the next one.